The old priest's hands trembled as he gripped the confessional screen, his face ashen. On the other side, a man's tear-choked voice whispered of unimaginable horrors, of lives brutally taken and souls forever scarred. Father Thomas slumped against the worn wooden panel, his mind reeling as he absorbed the weight of Jack Wilson's confession. For 30 years, he had listened to the sins and struggles of his parishioners in this small booth, offering comfort and guidance. But nothing in his long career had prepared him for this moment. I've killed people, Father. Jack's voice quivered. So many people. I can't live with it anymore. The priest closed his eyes, fighting waves of nausea as Jack recounted his crimes in excruciating detail. 6 lives snuffed out over the past decade. Men and women who had crossed paths with a monster wearing a friendly face. With each revelation, Father Thomas felt the foundations of his faith shake. "Why have you come to me?" He finally managed to ask, his own voice barely above a whisper. "Because I want to stop," Jack replied, a sob escaping him. "I want to turn myself in, to face justice, but I'm scared. I need help to do the right thing." Father Thomas's mind raced. His duty as a priest demanded he maintain the sanctity of confession. But could he truly keep silent, knowing a killer walked free? The faces of the victims' families flashed before him. Good people from his own community, still searching for answers. "I understand your fear," he said carefully. "But confessing your crimes to me does not absolve you of responsibility. True repentance requires action, making amends as best you can." "I know," Jack whispered. "That's why I'm here. I want to turn myself in, but I'm not ready yet. I need time to say goodbye to my family, to prepare. Can you help me, Father? Can you guide me to do this the right way?" Father Thomas's heart pounded. Every instinct screamed at him to call the police immediately. And yet, a small voice inside him wondered, if Jack truly wanted redemption, could this be an opportunity for something greater? "I cannot condone or conceal your crimes," the priest said firmly. "But if you are sincere in your desire to face justice and make amends, perhaps there is a way forward. Give me some time to pray on this, to seek guidance. Return tomorrow, and we will discuss how to proceed." As Jack murmured his thanks and left the confessional, Father Thomas remained frozen in place. The weight of 6 lives lost and 1 soul seeking salvation pressed down on him. He knew that his next actions would have profound consequences, not just for Jack and the victims' families, but for the entire community of Millbrook. Outside the church, life in the small Midwestern town continued as usual. Shopkeepers greeted customers, children laughed on playgrounds, and neighbors chatted over white picket fences. None of them aware that their quiet community harbored a killer, or that their trusted priest now carried a secret that could tear their world apart. Father Thomas emerged from the confessional on shaky legs, making his way to the church's small office. He sank into his chair, head in his hands, and began to pray fervently for guidance. As the afternoon light faded to dusk, he wrestled with questions of morality, justice, and the true nature of redemption. By the time he rose, a plan had begun to form in his mind. It was unorthodox, perhaps even dangerous. But if it worked, it might offer a chance at healing for both the perpetrator and the community he had wounded so deeply. As Father Thomas locked up the church that evening, he gazed up at the steeple silhouetted against the darkening sky. He whispered a final prayer, asking for the strength to walk the difficult path ahead. "Lord, grant me the wisdom to guide this lost soul towards true repentance," he murmured, "and forgive me for the deception I must now undertake." With a heavy heart, he turned towards the rectory, knowing that sleep would be elusive. Tomorrow would bring Jack's return, and with it, the first step on a journey that would test the limits of faith, forgiveness, and the human capacity for change. The next morning dawned gray and overcast, mirroring Father Thomas's troubled mood. He moved through his daily routines mechanically, mind constantly returning to the weight of Jack's confession and the decision that lay before him. As he walked to the church, he nodded absently to parishioners, barely registering their greetings. Mrs. Henderson, the elderly widow who tended the church garden, called out to him, "Father Thomas, are you feeling all right? You look like you've seen a ghost." He managed a wan smile. "Just a bit under the weather, Margaret." Nothing to worry about. If only she knew, he thought, the true specter that haunted him. Inside the church, Father Thomas knelt before the altar, seeking one last moment of clarity before Jack's arrival. The silence was broken by the creak of the heavy wooden doors. He turned to see Jack Wilson standing hesitantly in the entrance, looking far more ordinary than a man with such terrible secrets should. "Come in, my son," Father Thomas said, gesturing to a pew in the front row. As Jack sat, the priest studied him closely. In the harsh light of day, he could see the toll Jack's crimes had taken on him, deep lines etched in his face, eyes haunted by memories he could never erase. "Have you considered what we discussed yesterday?" Father Thomas asked. Jack nodded, his voice barely above a whisper. "I have, Father. I'm ready to turn myself in, but I'm terrified. What will happen to my family? How can I face the families of those I—" He trailed off, unable to speak the word. Father Thomas took a deep breath, steeling himself for what he was about to propose. "Jack, I believe that true redemption requires more than just facing earthly justice. It demands that we try to repair the harm we've caused, to whatever extent possible." Jack looked up, confusion evident in his eyes. "What do you mean?" "I'm proposing a test," Father Thomas said carefully. "A chance for you to prove the sincerity of your repentance before you turn yourself in. To do some good in this community you've hurt so deeply." He outlined his plan, a series of anonymous acts of charity and service, orchestrated in secret. Jack would work through the church to help those in need, particularly the families of his victims, without revealing his identity. "This isn't about escaping justice," Father Thomas emphasized. "You will still turn yourself in, but this way, you can leave behind some measure of good to balance against your crimes." Jack's eyes widened as he absorbed the priest's words. "You would help me do this, even knowing what I've done?" Father Thomas nodded gravely. "I believe in the power of redemption, Jack, but make no mistake, this will not be easy. You'll be working in the shadows, unable to take credit for any good you do. And at the end of it all, you will still face the consequences of your actions." For a long moment, Jack was silent, clearly wrestling with the enormity of what was being offered. Finally, he looked up, a glimmer of hope in his eyes for the first time. "I'll do it," he said. "Whatever it takes to make things right, even a little bit." As they began to discuss the details of their clandestine plan, neither man noticed a figure who had slipped into the back of the church. Detective Sarah Johnson, who had been investigating the unsolved murders for years, watched the intense conversation with growing suspicion. What secret, she wondered, could bring together the town's beloved priest and a man she had never seen before in such an apparently serious discussion? Little did she know that her dogged pursuit of justice was about to collide with a radical experiment in redemption, one that would challenge everything she thought she knew about right and wrong. As Father Thomas and Jack continued their hushed conversation, the stage was set for a series of events that would shake the town of Millbrook to its very foundations. As Father Thomas and Jack finalized the details of their unorthodox arrangement, the priest felt a strange mixture of hope and trepidation. He knew he was walking a dangerous line, balancing his duty to his faith with his obligation to the community he served. "Remember, Jack," Father Thomas said sternly, "this is not absolution. It's a chance to do some good before you face the consequences of your actions." Jack nodded, his face a mask of determination and fear. "I understand, Father. I'll do whatever you ask." As they parted ways, Father Thomas caught sight of Detective Sarah Johnson slipping out of the church. A chill ran down his spine. Had she overheard anything? He made a mental note to be more careful in the future. Over the next few weeks, a series of mysterious good deeds began to ripple through Millbrook. An anonymous donation allowed the local food bank to expand its services. A group of volunteers, their faces hidden behind masks, cleaned up the town's neglected cemetery. Families struggling with medical bills found envelopes of cash in their mailboxes. At the center of it all was Father Thomas, carefully orchestrating Jack's acts of penance while maintaining the secrecy of their arrangement. He watched with a mixture of pride and unease as the community began to buzz with speculation about their mysterious benefactor. One afternoon, As Father Thomas was leaving the church, he ran into Sarah Johnson. The detective's sharp eyes studied him intently. "Father Thomas," she said, her tone casual but her gaze piercing. "I've been meaning to talk to you about something." The priest felt his heart rate quicken. "Oh? What about detective?" Sarah glanced around, ensuring they were alone. "I couldn't help but notice you've been having some intense conversations with a man I don't recognize. In my line of work, that raises questions." Father Thomas forced a smile. "I speak with many people, detective. Some seeking spiritual guidance, others simply a friendly ear. I'm sure you understand the importance of confidentiality in my position." Sarah's eyes narrowed slightly. "Of course, but if there's anything you think might be relevant to my investigations, I hope you'll remember your duty as a citizen as well as a priest." As she walked away, Father Thomas felt the weight of his secret pressing down on him. He knew he was taking an enormous risk, not just with his own reputation, but with the trust of his entire congregation. Meanwhile, Jack Wilson was grappling with his own internal struggles. Each act of charity brought a small measure of peace, but it also intensified his guilt. He found himself lying awake at night, haunted by the faces of those he had killed. One evening, as Jack was volunteering at the soup kitchen, his face obscured by a baseball cap and fake beard, he overheard a conversation that made his blood run cold. "Did you hear about the new lead in the serial killer case?" One volunteer whispered to another. "Detective Johnson thinks she's close to a breakthrough." Jack's hands shook as he ladled soup in the bowls. He knew his time was running out. The urge to flee, to disappear and start a new life was almost overwhelming. But the memory of his promise to Father Thomas kept him rooted in place. As the weeks passed, the mood in Millbrook began to shift. The initial excitement over the mysterious acts of kindness gave way to a deeper sense of community and connection. People began to look out for each other more, inspired by the anonymous generosity they had witnessed. Father Thomas watched these changes with a mixture of joy and trepidation. He could see the positive impact of Jack's actions, but he also knew that the truth would eventually come to light. How would the community react when they learned the source of these good deeds? One Sunday morning, as Father Thomas prepared for his sermon, he received an unexpected visitor. Michael Andrews, the town's mayor, burst into the church office, his face flushed with excitement. "Father Thomas!" he exclaimed. "I've just had the most brilliant idea. We need to organize a town hall meeting to discuss all these wonderful things happening in Millbrook. Maybe we can figure out who's behind it all and thank them properly." The priest felt a cold knot form in his stomach. "I'm not sure that's wise, Michael," he said carefully. "Perhaps the anonymity is part of the beauty of these acts." But the mayor was not to be dissuaded. As he left, already planning the event, Father Thomas sank into his chair, head in his hands. He knew that the delicate balance he had been maintaining was about to be shattered. That evening, as the sun set over Millbrook, casting long shadows across the town square, Father Thomas met Jack in the privacy of the church basement. "We're running out of time," the priest said gravely. "The town is getting too curious, and Detective Johnson is closing in. We need to move forward with the final stage of our plan." Jack nodded, his face pale but resolute. "I'm ready, Father. I've done what I can to help." It's time to face the music. As they discussed the details of Jack's surrender, neither man was aware of the figure listening intently from the shadows. Emily Chun, a young volunteer at the church, had come to drop off some paperwork and stumbled upon the secret meeting. Her eyes wide with shock, Emily listened as the truth unfolded before her. The mysterious benefactor, the unsolved murders, the priest's impossible moral dilemma. It all came crashing together in a moment of terrible clarity. As Emily slipped away, her mind reeling from what she had learned, she found herself faced with an impossible choice of her own. Should she reveal what she knew, potentially destroying the fragile peace that had settled over Millbrook? Or should she keep this explosive secret, becoming complicit in a conspiracy that went against everything she believed in? The stage was set for a confrontation that would test the limits of forgiveness, justice, and the complex bonds of community. As night fell over Millbrook, the town slept peacefully, unaware of the moral reckoning that awaited them all. The morning of the town hall meeting dawned bright and clear, a stark contrast to the storm of emotions brewing within Father Thomas. As he dressed for the day, his hands trembled slightly, the weight of his secret pressing down on him like a physical force. Across town, Jack Wilson sat at his kitchen table, staring blankly at a cup of cold coffee. Today was the day he would face the consequences of his actions. He had spent the night writing letters to his family, to the families of his victims, to Father Thomas. Each word felt inadequate, a pitiful attempt to explain the inexplicable. Meanwhile, Detective Sarah Johnson pored over case files in her office, a nagging feeling of unease gnawing at her. She couldn't shake the sense that she was missing something crucial, that the answer to the long-unsolved murders was tantalizingly close. As the townspeople of Millbrook began to gather in the community center, an air of excitement and curiosity filled the air. Mayor Andrews bustled about, greeting people with a wide smile, eager to capitalize on the positive energy that had been building in recent weeks. Emily Chun arrived early, her face pale and drawn from a sleepless night. She had wrestled with her conscience, torn between her loyalty to the church and her sense of right and wrong. As she helped set up Chaz, her eyes kept darting to the door, waiting for Father Thomas to arrive. The priest entered the hall just as the meeting was about to begin, his usual warm smile replaced by a tight-lipped expression of concern. He nodded to Emily, noticing her anxious glances, but unaware of the true cause of her distress. Mayor Andrews called the meeting to order, his booming voice silencing the excited chatter. "Friends, neighbors," he began, beaming at the assembled crowd. "We've gathered here today to celebrate the incredible spirit of generosity that has swept through our town. Over the past weeks, we've seen anonymous acts of kindness that have touched many lives. Today, we hope to shed some light on these mysterious events and perhaps even unmask our secret benefactor." A murmur of excitement rippled through the crowd. Father Thomas felt his heart rate quicken, knowing that the carefully constructed facade was about to crumble. As various townspeople stood to share stories of the good deeds they had witnessed or benefited from, Jack Wilson slipped quietly into the back of the hall. He wore a baseball cap pulled low over his eyes, trying to remain inconspicuous for just a little longer. Detective Johnson, seated near the front, listened to the testimonials with growing interest. Her keen eyes scanned the crowd, noting Father Thomas's uncharacteristic discomfort and the nervous energy emanating from Emily Chun. As the meeting progressed, the detective's suspicions crystallized into a terrible certainty. The pattern of the good deeds, the timing, the inside knowledge required, it all pointed to someone intimately familiar with the town's needs, someone who had access to information about the victims' families. Just as Mayor Andrews was wrapping up the meeting, Detective Johnson stood abruptly. "I'm sorry to interrupt," she said, her voice cutting through the jovial atmosphere like a knife. "But I believe I know the identity of our mystery benefactor." A hush fell over the crowd. Father Thomas felt the blood drain from his face. "These acts of kindness," Sarah continued, her eyes locked on the priest, "while undoubtedly good for our community, align too perfectly with the victims of our unsolved murder cases. I believe they're acts of penance, performed by the killer himself." Gasps and murmurs of shock rippled through the audience. Emily Chun let out a small, choked sob. "Father Thomas," Detective Johnson said, her voice softening slightly, "I think it's time you told us what you know." All eyes turned to the priest, who stood slowly, his shoulders sagging under the weight of his secret. "My friends," he began, his voice barely above a whisper, "what I'm about to tell you will be difficult to hear, but I ask that you listen with open hearts and minds." As Father Thomas began to explain the events of the past weeks, the atmosphere in the hall shifted from shock to anger to confusion. He spoke of Jack's confession, of their plan for redemption, of the genuine remorse and desire to make amends. "I know I've betrayed your trust," the priest said, his voice cracking with emotion. "I only hope to bring some good out of this terrible situation, to give our community a chance to heal." Before anyone could respond, there was a commotion at the back of the hall. Jack Wilson stood, removing his cap. "It's me," he said, his voice carrying clearly through the stunned silence. "I'm the one you've been looking for, the one who committed those horrible crimes." Detective Johnson moved swiftly, handcuffing Jack even as the crowd erupted into chaos. Some people surged forward, their faces contorted with rage, while others recoiled in horror. Amidst the tumult, Emily Chan found her voice. "Wait!" she cried out. "Please, everyone, listen." Slowly, the noise subsided as all eyes turned to the young woman. I overheard Father Thomas and Jack talking," she admitted, her voice shaking. "I know what they've been doing, and I know it doesn't make up for the lives lost. But I've seen the good it's brought to our town, the families that have been helped, the hope it's given people." She turned to face the families of the victims, tears streaming down her face. "I can't imagine your pain, and I'm not saying we should forgive or forget, but maybe there's a way to honor those we've lost by building something positive from this tragedy." A heavy silence fell over the hall as Emily's words sank in. The air thrummed with tension, a community poised on the knife edge between vengeance and an almost impossible forgiveness. In that charged moment, Sharon Talbot, the mother of one of the victims, slowly stood. Her face was a mask of conflicting emotions as she looked from Jack to Father Thomas to Emily. "I've spent years consumed by hatred for the monster who took my daughter," she said, her voice raw with pain. "I've wished him dead 1,000 times over, but seeing what's happened in our town these past weeks, the lives that have been changed, I don't know what to think anymore." She took a deep, shuddering breath. "I'm not saying I forgive you," she said, looking directly at Jack. "I don't know if I ever can, but I think my Katie would have wanted something good to come from this. She always believed in second chances." As Sharon's words hung in the air, the mood in the hall began to shift. The initial shock and anger gave way to a more complex tapestry of emotions: grief, confusion, a tentative hope. Mayor Andrews, who had been struck speechless by the revelations, finally found his voice. "This is unprecedented," he said, looking shell-shocked. "We need time to process this, to figure out how to move forward as a community." Detective Johnson nodded grimly. "Mr. Wilson will be taken into custody," she said. "The legal process must run its course, but perhaps, in time, we can find a way to incorporate restorative justice into this situation." As Jack was led away, he locked eyes with Father Thomas one last time. A wordless understanding passed between them, a recognition of the complex, messy nature of redemption and the long, difficult road that lay ahead. The town hall meeting broke up in a subdued atmosphere, people leaving in small groups, talking in hushed voices about what they had witnessed. The story of Millbrook's secret benefactor and the priest who had guided him would soon spread far beyond the town's borders, igniting debates about justice, forgiveness, and the possibility of redemption. For Father Thomas, the hardest part was yet to come. He knew he would face censure from the church hierarchy, potential legal consequences, and the monumental task of rebuilding trust with his congregation. But as he watched the last of the townspeople leave the hall, he felt a glimmer of hope. In the midst of tragedy and moral ambiguity, the people of Millbrook had been given a chance to confront deep-seated wounds and to consider the true meaning of justice and community. The path forward would not be easy, but it held the promise of healing and growth. As the sun began to set on this momentous day, Father Thomas knelt in the empty hall, offering a prayer for guidance, forgiveness, and the strength to face whatever challenges lay ahead. In the days following the town hall meeting, Millbrook found itself thrust into the national spotlight. News vans lined the quiet streets, reporters clamoring for interviews with anyone connected to the story. The tale of a serial killer's anonymous acts of charity, guided by a conflicted priest, had captured the public imagination. Father Thomas, stripped of his duties pending an investigation by the diocese, retreated to the rectory. He spent long hours in prayer and contemplation, wrestling with the consequences of his actions. The constant ringing of the phone and knocking at the door served as a reminder of the turmoil he had unleashed. Detective Sarah Johnson, meanwhile, found herself at the center of a professional maelstrom. Her superiors demanded answers about how she had missed the connection for so long, while prosecutors peppered her with questions about the viability of their case against Jack Wilson. One afternoon, as Sarah sat in her office reviewing case files, she received an unexpected visitor. Emily Chun knocked tentatively on the open door, her face a mask of nervous determination. "Detective Johnson, do you have a moment?" Sarah nodded, gesturing for the young woman to take a seat. "What can I do for you, Miss Chun?" Emily took a deep breath. "One, I want to make a formal statement about what I overheard between Father Thomas and Jack Wilson. I think it's important for the full story to be told." As Emily recounted the conversation she had witnessed in the church basement, Sarah listened intently, her detective's mind fitting the new pieces into the complex puzzle before her. "Thank you for coming forward," Sarah said when Emily had finished. "This will help provide a clearer picture of the situation." Emily nodded, then hesitated. "Detective, what do you think will happen now? To Father Thomas and Jack, I mean." Sarah sighed, removing her glasses to rub the bridge of her nose. "Honestly, I'm not sure. This case is unprecedented. Jack Wilson will face trial for his crimes, that's certain. But the nature of his recent actions and Father Thomas's involvement, it complicates things. Single quotes. Across town, Mayor Michael Andrews was facing his own crisis. The phones at City Hall rang constantly with calls from concerned citizens and curious outsiders. He had called an emergency meeting of the town council to discuss how to handle the media frenzy and the deep divisions that had emerged in the community. As the council members filed into the conference room, Michael could see the strain on their faces. This was a challenge unlike any they had faced before. "Folks," he began, "once everyone was seated, we need to find a way to bring our town together. This situation has the potential to tear us apart if we're not careful." Councilwoman Evelyn Reeves, a staunch advocate for victims' rights, spoke up. "How can we even think about unity when a murderer was walking free among us, and aided by a priest, no less?" "I understand your anger, Evelyn," Michael replied, "but we also can't ignore the good that's been done. Families have been helped, lives improved. We need to find a balance between justice and healing." As the council debated, their voices rising and falling, the complexities of the situation became increasingly clear. There were no easy answers, no clear path forward that would satisfy everyone. Meanwhile, in the county jail, Jack Wilson sat in his cell, the weight of his crimes and his recent attempts at redemption pressing down on him. He had declined all interview requests, speaking only to his court-appointed lawyer. One evening, as Jack lay on his bunk staring at the ceiling, a guard approached his cell. "Wilson, you have a visitor." Puzzled, Jack followed the guard to the visitation area. His confusion turned to shock when he saw Sharon Talbot, the mother of one of his victims, waiting on the other side of the glass. With trembling hands, he picked up the phone. "Mrs. Talbot, don't speak." Sharon cut him off, her voice tight with emotion. "I need you to listen." Jack nodded, his throat constricting. "I've been trying to understand," Sharon continued, her eyes boring into Jack's. "Trying to make sense of how the man who took my Katie could also be the one who's brought so much help to our community. I've read about your childhood, about the abuse you suffered. I'm not saying it excuses what you did, but I think I'm starting to see you as a human being, a deeply flawed, damaged human being who did monstrous things, but also someone capable of change." Tears streamed down Jack's face as he listened, unable to look away from Sharon's intense gaze. "I'm not here to offer forgiveness," she said, her voice breaking slightly. "I don't know if I'll ever be able to do that, but I'm here to tell you that I want your story, your journey, to mean something. I want the lives you've touched through your recent actions to be part of Katie's legacy. Can you understand that?" Jack nodded, unable to speak through his tears. As Sharon left the visitation room, she felt a strange mix of emotions: grief, anger, and a tiny, unexpected flicker of hope. She didn't know if she was doing the right thing, but she knew she had to try to find a way forward. Back in Millbrook, Father Thomas finally emerged from his self-imposed isolation. He had been summoned to a meeting with Bishop Callahan, his superior in the diocese. As he drove to the diocesan offices, he steeled himself for what he knew would be a difficult conversation. Bishop Callahan greeted him with a grave expression. "Thomas, I hope you understand the seriousness of this situation. Your actions have put the entire church in a difficult position." "I understand, Your Excellency," Father Thomas replied. "I acted according to my conscience, trying to bring about some good from a terrible situation. But I know I've broken trust and caused pain to many." The bishop sighed heavily. "Your intentions may have been good, Thomas, but the road to hell is paved with good intentions. The question now is, what do we do moving forward?" As they discussed the potential consequences, both for Father Thomas personally and for the church as a whole, the priest felt a strange sense of calm settle over him. He had known, from the moment he made his decision to help Jack, that it might cost him everything. But he also believed, deep in his soul, that it had been the right thing to do. "Whatever punishment the church deems appropriate, I will accept," Father Thomas said finally. "But I ask that you consider the impact on the community. They're grappling with difficult questions of forgiveness and justice. They need guidance now more than ever." Bishop Callahan nodded slowly. "I'll take that under advisement. For now, you'll remain suspended from your duties. We'll make a final decision after Jack Wilson's trial." As Father Thomas left the diocesan offices, he felt both a weight lifted and a new burden settled on his shoulders. The path ahead was uncertain, but he was committed to seeing it through, whatever the cost. That evening, as the sun set over Millbrook, casting long shadows across the town square, the community gathered for a candlelight vigil. It had been organized by a group of citizens who wanted to honor the victims of Jack's crimes, while also acknowledging the complex emotions stirred up by recent events. As candles flickered in the twilight, casting a warm glow on the faces of the assembled townspeople, Emily Chun stepped forward to address the crowd. "We come together tonight in memory of those we've lost," she began, her voice carrying clearly in the hushed atmosphere. "But we also come together to reaffirm our commitment to each other, to healing, and to building a stronger community in the face of tragedy." As Emily spoke, her words seemed to touch something deep within the gathered crowd. There were tears, nods of agreement, and moments of profound silence as people reflected on the difficult journey that lay ahead. The vigil marked a turning point for Millbrook. It didn't erase the pain or solve the complex moral questions raised by recent events, but it provided a moment of unity, a collective acknowledgement of shared grief and cautious hope. As the candles burned low and people began to disperse, there was a sense that something had shifted. The road ahead would be long and difficult, but the people of Millbrook were ready to face it together, united in their determination to find meaning and healing in the wake of tragedy. As the weeks passed, Millbrook settled into an uneasy rhythm. The media frenzy gradually subsided, but the town remained divided on how to move forward. The approaching trial of Jack Wilson loomed large in everyone's minds, a constant reminder of the unresolved tensions simmering beneath the surface. Father Thomas, still suspended from his duties, found himself at loose ends. Unable to provide comfort and guidance to his parishioners in an official capacity, he began volunteering at the local homeless shelter. It was there, among society's most marginalized, that he found a measure of peace and purpose. One afternoon, as he was serving lunch at the shelter, he was approached by a familiar face. Detective Sarah Johnson stood before him, her expression a mix of professional detachment and personal curiosity. "Father Thomas," she said, nodding in greeting. "I was hoping we could talk." They found a quiet corner of the shelter's small office. Sarah pulled out a notebook, her demeanor shifting into investigator mode. "I've been reviewing all the evidence," she began, "and there are still some things I'm trying to understand. Can you tell me more about how you decided to help Jack with his act of penance?" Father Thomas sighed, running a hand through his graying hair. "It wasn't an easy decision, Detective. I struggled with it for days. But in the end, I believed that if Jack was truly repentant, guiding him towards positive action might bring some good out of this terrible situation." Sarah nodded, making notes. "And at no point did you consider turning him in immediately?" "Of course I considered it," Father Thomas replied, his voice tinged with frustration. "Every moment of every day. But I also believed in the sanctity of confession, in the possibility of redemption. I know now that many would say I made the wrong choice, but at the time, I truly believed I was doing what was best for everyone involved." As they continued to talk, Sarah found herself grudgingly admiring the priest's sincerity, even as she questioned his judgment. The case had forced her to confront her own beliefs about justice and morality in ways she never expected. Across town, in the offices of the Millbrook Gazette, Editor-in-Chief Margot Winters was facing her own ethical dilemma. She had received an anonymous package containing Jack Wilson's personal journals, detailing both his crimes and his recent attempts at redemption. Margot sat at her desk, staring at the stack of notebooks before her. Publishing their contents would undoubtedly be a journalistic coup, but it could also jeopardize the upcoming trial and further divide the community. After hours of deliberation, she called a meeting with her senior staff. "We have a responsibility to report the truth," she told them, "but we also have a duty to our community. We need to find a way to handle this information ethically and sensitively." As the editorial team debated long into the night, they grappled with questions that went to the heart of their profession. How does one balance the public's right to know with the potential for harm? What role should a local newspaper play in a community's healing process? Meanwhile, Emily Chun found herself thrust into an unexpected role as a mediator and voice of reconciliation in the community. Her impassioned speech at the town hall meeting had resonated with many, and people began seeking her out for guidance and support. One evening, as Emily was leaving her volunteer shift at the community center, she was approached by a group of teenagers. They looked nervous but determined. "Miss Chun," one of them said, "a girl named Jasmine. We've been thinking about everything that's happened, and we want to do something to help, to show that our generation wants to be part of the solution. Do you have any ideas?" Emily felt a surge of hope at the young people's initiative. "I think that's wonderful," she said warmly. "Why don't we sit down and brainstorm some ideas?" Over the next hour, Emily and the teens developed a plan for a youth-led community service program. They would organize projects to address some of the issues Jack Wilson had targeted in his anonymous acts of charity, but with a focus on long-term, sustainable change. As the teens left, energized and excited about their plans, Emily felt a renewed sense of purpose. She realized that while the town's adults were still mired in debates about justice and forgiveness, the younger generation was ready to take concrete action to heal their community. In the county jail, Jack Wilson continued to grapple with the weight of his crimes and the unexpected consequences of his attempts at redemption. His lawyer, a public defender named Mark Ramirez, visited him regularly to prepare for the upcoming trial. During one such visit, Mark broached a difficult subject. "Jack, the prosecution has offered a plea deal, life in prison with no possibility of parole, in exchange for a full confession and sparing the victims' families the ordeal of a trial." Jack was silent for a long moment, staring down at his hands. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "What do you think I should do?" Mark leaned forward, his expression serious. "Legally speaking, it's a good deal. The evidence against you is overwhelming, and your recent actions, while admirable, don't negate your earlier crimes. But ultimately, this has to be your decision. You need to think about what you can live with and what might bring the most peace to the victims' families." As Jack wrestled with this monumental decision, the ripple effects of the case continued to spread beyond Millbrook. Legal scholars debated the implications of Father Thomas's actions for clergy penitent privilege. Criminologists studied the case as an unusual example of a serial killer attempting restitution. In a surprising development, a group of criminal justice reform advocates reached out to Mayor Michael Andrews. They saw the unique circumstances of the case as an opportunity to pilot a restorative justice program, bringing together victims, offenders, and the community to address harm and promote healing. The mayor, seeing a potential way to bridge the divides in his town, agreed to meet with the advocates. As they outlined their proposal, Michael felt a glimmer of hope. Could this be a way to satisfy both the need for justice and the desire for community healing? As the date of Jack's trial approached, tensions in Millbrook reached a fever pitch. The town was a powder keg of emotions: grief, anger, confusion, and a tentative hope for resolution. Father Thomas, still grappling with the consequences of his choices, decided to break his public silence. He wrote an open letter to the community, which Margot Winters agreed to publish in the Millbrook Gazette. In the letter, the priest didn't ask for forgiveness or try to justify his actions. Instead, He called for compassion and unity in the face of tragedy. He urged the townspeople to support the victims' families, to engage in honest dialogue about difficult issues, and to work together to build a stronger, more caring community. The letter sparked intense debate, with some praising Father Thomas's humility and vision, while others condemned him for what they saw as an attempt to minimize his role in the controversy. As the sun set on the eve of Jack Wilson's trial, the people of Millbrook found themselves at a crossroads. The coming days would determine not just the fate of one man, but the future of an entire community. The questions of justice, forgiveness, and redemption that had been raised would not be easily answered. But in grappling with them, the town had the opportunity to forge a new path forward. In the quiet of his cell, Jack Wilson made his decision about the plea deal, knowing it would shape the lives of many for years to come. In her office, Detective Sarah Johnson reviewed her notes one last time, preparing to take the stand. And in the church he could no longer officially serve, Father Thomas knelt in prayer, asking for guidance and strength for all those affected by the trials to come. The stage was set for a legal and moral reckoning that would challenge the very foundations of justice and community in Millbrook. As the first day of Jack Wilson's trial dawned, Millbrook was a town holding its collective breath. The courthouse steps were crowded with reporters, curious onlookers, and protesters bearing signs with conflicting messages of justice and forgiveness. Inside the courtroom, the atmosphere was tense as Judge Eleanor Simmons called the proceedings to order. The prosecution team, led by the steely-eyed District Attorney Vanessa Rodriguez, sat ready to present their case. Across the aisle, Mark Ramirez, Jack's public defender, looked pale but determined. Jack Wilson was led in, his face a mask of resigned sorrow. As he took his seat, his eyes scanned the courtroom, briefly meeting the gaze of Father Thomas, who sat in the back row, his clerical collar conspicuously absent. In her opening statement, Nay Rodriguez painted a vivid picture of Jack's crimes, her words bringing tears to the eyes of many in attendance. She acknowledged his recent acts of charity, but argued that they in no way mitigated the severity of his earlier actions. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," she concluded, her voice ringing with conviction, "do not be swayed by recent events. Jack Wilson is a calculating killer who evaded justice for years. His victims and their families deserve closure and justice." When it was Mark Ramirez's turn to speak, he took a different approach. "We are not here to deny M.R. Wilson's crimes," he began, his voice steady. "He has admitted his guilt and is prepared to face the consequences. But I ask you to consider the full complexity of this case. Can a person change? Can genuine remorse and a desire to make amends count for anything in our justice system?" As the trial progressed over the next few days, a parade of witnesses took the stand. Detective Sarah Johnson testified about the investigation, her professionalism masking her lingering doubts and conflicted feelings about the case. Family members of the victims gave heart-wrenching impact statements, their grief and anger palpable in the courtroom. But some, like Sharon Talbot, also spoke of their conflicted feelings about Jack's recent actions and the question of redemption. Outside the courthouse, the community of Millbrook grappled with the daily revelations from the trial. The Millbrook Gazette, under Margot Winter's leadership, provided thoughtful, nuanced coverage, resisting the temptation to sensationalize. Emily Chun, true to her newfound role as a community mediator, organized daily discussion groups where people could share their thoughts and feelings about the trial in a safe, respectful environment. Midway through the trial, an unexpected development sent shockwaves through the proceedings. Mayor Michael Andrews, in consultation with the district attorney's office and the victims' families, announced that Millbrook had been selected for a pilot restorative justice program. If all parties agree, the mayor explained in a press conference, this program would run parallel to the traditional legal process. It would provide a forum for dialogue between the offender, the victims' families, and the broader community, with the goal of addressing harm and promoting healing. The announcement sparked intense debate both in and out of the courtroom. Some saw it as an innovative approach to a complex case, while others decried it as an insult to the victims' memories. In a private chamber, Judge Simmons met with the attorneys from both sides to discuss the implications of this development. "This is highly unusual," she admitted, "but given the unique circumstances of this case, I'm willing to consider it. However, the decision ultimately rests with Mar Wilson and the victims' families." As the trial entered its second week, it was Jack Wilson's turn to take the stand. The courtroom fell silent as he was sworn in, all eyes fixed on the man whose actions had torn the community apart and whose attempts at redemption had sparked a national conversation. Jack's testimony was raw and unflinching. He spared no detail in describing his crimes, his voice breaking as he recounted each life he had taken. But he also spoke of his moment of realization, his confession to Father Thomas, and his desperate desire to do something, anything, to try to balance the scales. "I know that nothing I do can ever make up for the lives I've taken," he said, his eyes brimming with tears. "I don't expect forgiveness. I don't deserve it. But when Father Thomas offered me a chance to do some good, to help people anonymously, I saw it as a way to at least try to put some good back into the world. I know it doesn't erase my crimes. I'm prepared to spend the rest of my life in prison, but I hope that maybe, in some small way, some good can come from all of this pain." As Jack stepped down from the witness stand, a murmur ran through the courtroom. His raw honesty had affected many, though opinions remained sharply divided on whether it should impact his sentence. The next day, it was Father Thomas's turn to testify. As he took the stand, he could feel the weight of his parishioners' eyes upon him, some supportive, others accusatory. Under questioning from both the prosecution and defense, Father Thomas explained his decision-making process, his belief in the possibility of redemption, and his hope that guiding Jack towards anonymous acts of charity might bring some healing to the community. "I know that many believe I made the wrong choice," he said, his voice steady despite his obvious emotion. "And I've spent countless nights questioning my decision. But in that moment, faced with a repentant man seeking to make amends, I chose to believe in the power of transformation. I chose hope over despair, potential redemption over immediate punishment. Whether that choice was right or wrong, I will carry the weight of it for the rest of my life." As the trial neared its conclusion, the question of the restorative justice program loomed large. In a surprising turn of events, Sharon Talbot, speaking on behalf of several of the victims' families, announced their willingness to participate. "We've discussed this at length," she told the court, her voice quavering but determined. "And while it doesn't change our desire to see justice served through this trial, we believe that participating in this program might help us find some closure and perhaps prevent future tragedies." With this development, all eyes turned to Jack Wilson. Would he agree to participate in a process that would bring him face to face with the families of those he had harmed? As the jury began their deliberations, Millbrook found itself at a crossroads. The outcome of this trial would do more than determine one man's fate. It would shape the town's approach to justice, forgiveness, and community healing for years to come. In the tense days of waiting, Father Thomas retreated to the church, spending long hours in prayer and reflection. Detective Sarah Johnson buried herself in work, trying to reconcile her commitment to justice with her growing understanding of the case's complexities. Emily Chun continued her efforts to bring the community together, organizing a candlelight vigil outside the courthouse. Finally, after 4 days of deliberation, the jury reached a verdict. As Judge Simmons called the court to order, the entire town seemed to hold its breath, knowing that whatever the outcome, nothing in Millbrook would ever be quite the same again. As the jury foreman stood to deliver the verdict, a hush fell over the packed courtroom. Jack Wilson, pale and drawn, stared straight ahead, his hands clasped tightly in front of him. Father Thomas, seated in the back, closed his eyes in silent prayer. On the charges of first-degree murder, we find the defendant, Jack Wilson, guilty on all counts. A collective gasp rippled through the courtroom, followed by a mix of sobs and murmurs. Jack's shoulders slumped slightly, but his expression remained one of resigned acceptance. Judge Simmons called for order, her gavel cutting through the noise. "The court thanks the jury for their service. We will reconvene tomorrow for sentencing." As the courtroom emptied, Reporters rushed to file their stories, and the people of Millbrook began to process the verdict. The town square quickly filled with impromptu gatherings, people seeking connection and understanding in the wake of this momentous decision. That evening, Mayor Michael Andrews called an emergency town council meeting to discuss the next steps, particularly regarding the proposed restorative justice program. The verdict has been rendered, he began, addressing the assembled council members and a gallery packed with concerned citizens. But we now have an opportunity to go beyond traditional punishment, to seek healing for our community in a way that honors the victims while also exploring the possibility of redemption. Councilwoman Evelyn Reeves, still skeptical, spoke up. How can we even consider this program? The man is a convicted murderer. He deserves to rot in prison. No one is suggesting he doesn't serve his time, the mayor countered. But if the victims' families are willing to participate, don't we owe it to them to at least try? As the debate raged on, Emily Chun, watching from the gallery, felt a sudden inspiration. She stood, raising her hand to speak. Our mayor, council members, she began, her voice trembling slightly but growing stronger. I have a proposal. What if we involve the youth of Millbrook in this process? They're the future of our town, and they've been deeply affected by these events. Maybe their perspective could help guide us forward. The mayor considered this for a moment, then nodded. That's an excellent suggestion, Miss Chun. Would you be willing to coordinate a youth advisory committee on this matter? Emily agreed, her mind already racing with ideas of how to involve the town's younger generation in this crucial decision. The next day, as Millbrook prepared for the sentencing hearing, Father Thomas made a difficult decision. He would attend not as a representative of the church, but as a private citizen seeking to make amends for his own role in the complex situation. As he entered the courthouse, he was met by Bishop Callahan. The two men regarded each other silently for a moment before the bishop spoke. Thomas, I want you to know that while the diocese cannot officially condone your actions, we recognize the moral complexity of the situation you faced. Whatever happens today, know that there may yet be a path forward for you within the church, if you wish it. Father Thomas nodded, grateful for this small olive branch. Thank you, Your Excellency. But today isn't about me. It's about justice, healing, and the future of our community. Inside the courtroom, Judge Simmons called the sentencing hearing to order. Di Rodriguez argued for the maximum penalty, life in prison without the possibility of parole. Mark Ramirez, acknowledging the severity of the crimes, nevertheless pleaded for the judge to consider Jack's genuine remorse and recent attempts at restitution. When it came time for Jack Wilson to speak, he rose slowly, his voice barely above a whisper. I stand before you, Your Honor, fully accepting the verdict and whatever sentence you deem appropriate. I know that nothing I say or do can ever make up for the lives I've taken, the families I've destroyed. I don't ask for forgiveness. I don't deserve it. But if there's any way my punishment can bring some measure of peace or closure to those I've harmed, I'm willing to do whatever is asked of me. Judge Simmons listened intently, her expression unreadable. When Jack finished, she spoke. Amar, Wilson, your crimes are among the most heinous this court has ever seen. The pain you've caused is immeasurable. And yet, your recent actions and willingness to accept responsibility do not go unnoticed. This case has forced us all to grapple with difficult questions about justice, redemption, and the nature of punishment. She paused, surveying the tense courtroom before continuing. It is the judgment of this court that you be sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. However, she raised her voice slightly as murmurs broke out. In light of the unique circumstances of this case and the willingness of the victims' families, I am also ordering your participation in the proposed restorative justice program. Should you choose to accept, the judge's decision sent shockwaves through the community. Some felt justice had been served, while others argued the sentence was too lenient. The prospect of the restorative justice program added another layer of complexity to an already fraught situation. In the days that followed, Emily Chen worked tirelessly with her newly formed Youth Advisory Committee. They organized town halls, conducted surveys, and engaged in deep discussions about justice, forgiveness, and community healing. One evening, As Emily was reviewing the committee's findings, she received an unexpected visitor. Detective Sarah Johnson knocked on her door, looking uncharacteristically uncertain. "Mrs. Chun," Sarah began, "I've been watching you work with the youth committee. I'm impressed by what you're doing. And, well, I was wondering if you could use some help from the law enforcement perspective." Emily smiled warmly, recognizing the olive branch for what it was. "We'd be honored, Detective. Your insight would be invaluable." As they began to discuss the program, Emily felt a glimmer of hope. The involvement of someone like Detective Johnson, who had been at the heart of the case from the beginning, could help bridge the gap between those seeking strict punishment and those open to alternative forms of justice. Meanwhile, Father Thomas, still grappling with the consequences of his actions, threw himself into community service. He volunteered at homeless shelters, counseled troubled youth, and worked to rebuild trust with his former parishioners, one conversation at a time. One Sunday, as he was serving meals at the shelter, he was approached by Sharon Talbot. The two had not spoken since the trial, and Father Thomas felt a pang of guilt as he met her gaze. "Mrs. Talbot, She held up a hand to stop him. "I'm not here for apologies, Father. I'm here because I've been thinking about this restorative justice program. I'm scared, and I'm angry, and part of me still wants to hate Jack Wilson with every fiber of my being. But I'm also tired of the anger, tired of the pain. I think I want to participate in the program, and I was hoping you might help me prepare for it." Father Thomas felt a wave of emotion wash over him. "Of course, Mrs. Talbot, whatever you need." As they sat down to talk, Father Thomas realized that this moment, this opportunity to help one of the people he had hurt most, was perhaps the truest form of penance he could offer. In the prison, Jack Wilson began the long process of coming to terms with his sentence and preparing for the restorative justice program. His days were filled with therapy sessions, religious counseling, and deep reflection on the harm he had caused. One afternoon, he received a letter from Emily Chun, explaining the Youth Advisory Committee and asking if he would be willing to answer some questions to help inform their work. Jack's hand trembled as he wrote his reply, overwhelmed by the idea that the young people of Millbrook were taking an active role in shaping the town's path forward. As the date for the first restorative justice session approached, Millbrook found itself at the center of a national conversation. Legal experts debated the merits of the program, criminologists studied its potential impact, and ethicists grappled with the moral implications. Mayor Michael Andrews, sensing the historical significance of the moment, worked with Margot Winters and the Millbrook Gazette to document the process, believing that their town's experience could provide valuable insights for communities around the country facing similar challenges. On the eve of the first session, the town gathered for a candlelight vigil organized by Emily's youth committee. As the flickering lights illuminated faces young and old, a sense of unity and shared purpose began to emerge. Emily stepped forward to address the crowd, her voice clear and strong. "Tomorrow we begin a journey into uncharted territory. It won't be easy. There will be pain, anger, and disagreement. But there will also be hope, healing, and the possibility of transformation. Whatever the outcome, we face it together, as one community." As the candles burned low and the crowd dispersed, the people of Millbrook returned to their homes, each grappling with their own thoughts and emotions about what lay ahead. They were about to embark on a profound experiment in justice and community healing, one that would challenge their deepest beliefs and potentially reshape their understanding of redemption, forgiveness, and the true meaning of justice. The morning of the first restorative justice session dawned clear and crisp, a stark contrast to the tumultuous emotions swirling through Millbrook. The community center, chosen as a neutral ground for these meetings, was abuzz with activity as facilitators made final preparations. Jack Wilson was escorted from the prison under heavy guard, his face a mask of anxiety and remorse. As he entered the building, he caught sight of Father Thomas and Emily Chun speaking quietly in a corner. Their eyes met briefly, a silent acknowledgement of the gravity of the moment passing between them. The victims' families arrived next, led by Sharon Talbot. Her face was set in grim determination, though her hand shook slightly as she clutched her purse. Detective Sarah Johnson accompanied them, offering quiet words of support. As the participants took their seats in the circle of chairs set up for the session, the tension in the room was palpable. The facilitator, Dr. Amelia Rodriguez, a renowned expert in restorative justice, stepped forward to address the group. "I want to thank you all for your courage in being here today," she began, her voice calm and reassuring. "What we're about to undertake is not easy, but it has the potential to bring healing and understanding in ways that traditional justice often cannot. Remember, this is a dialogue, not a debate. We're here to listen, to share, and to work towards restoration, not retribution." As the session began, Jack Wilson was given the opportunity to speak directly to the victims' families for the first time. His voice trembled as he addressed them. "I know that nothing I say can ever undo the pain I've caused you," he began, his eyes brimming with tears. "I don't expect forgiveness, and I know I don't deserve it. But I want you to know that I am truly deeply sorry for the lives I've taken and the suffering I've inflicted. If there's anything I can do, anything at all, to help ease your pain or bring you some measure of peace, I'm willing to do it." The room fell silent as Jack's words hung in the air. Then, slowly, Sharon Talbot leaned forward in her chair. "Why?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "I need to understand why you did it. Why my Katie? Why any of them?" Jack took a deep breath, visibly struggling with the weight of the question. I've spent countless hours in therapy trying to understand that myself. I know it's not an excuse, but I was filled with so much anger, so much pain from my own past. I felt powerless, and hurting others gave me a sense of control. But in the moment I took Katie's life, I felt that control slip away. I realized the monster I'd become. As Jack continued to speak, answering questions and listening to the raw emotions of the victims' families, something began to shift in the room. The anger and fear were still present, but there was also a growing sense of understanding, a recognition of shared humanity in the face of unimaginable tragedy. Outside the community center, a small crowd had gathered. Some held signs demanding harsh justice, while others advocated for forgiveness and healing. Emily's youth committee was there too, handing out information about the restorative justice process and engaging people in thoughtful discussions. Margot Winters, true to her commitment to responsible journalism, was present to document the event. But rather than sensationalizing the proceedings, she focused on capturing the nuanced emotions and complex dynamics at play. As the first session drew to a close, Dr. Rodriguez addressed the group once more. "This is just the beginning of a long and difficult journey," she reminded them. "But you've all taken an incredibly brave first step. Remember to be patient with yourselves and with each other as we continue this process." In the days that followed, Millbrook buzzed with discussions about the Restorative Justice Program. The Millbrook Gazette published a series of in-depth articles exploring different perspectives on the process, from legal experts to community members. Father Thomas, still navigating his role in the community, found himself sought out by people on all sides of the issue. Some condemned him for his initial decision to help Jack, while others praised his vision of redemption. The priest listened to all with humility, offering guidance where he could, but mainly providing a compassionate ear. One evening, as he was locking up the church after a long day of counseling sessions, he was approached by a young man he recognized as one of Emily's youth committee members. "Father Thomas?" the young man said hesitantly. "I'm Jake. I wanted to talk to you about forgiveness." "How do you forgive someone who's done something unforgivable?" The priest regarded Jake thoughtfully. "That's a profound question, Jake, and there's no easy answer. Forgiveness isn't about excusing the action or forgetting the harm done. It's about freeing yourself from the burden of anger and hate. It's a process, often a long and difficult one." As they continued to talk, Father Thomas realized that these conversations, these opportunities to grapple with life's most challenging moral questions, were at the heart of his calling. Whether or not he ever returned to his official duties, this was the work he was meant to do. Meanwhile, in the prison, Jack Wilson was experiencing his own transformation. The restorative justice sessions were grueling, forcing him to confront the full impact of his crimes in a way he never had before. But they were also opening his eyes to the possibility of contributing something positive to the world, even from behind bars. He began working with the prison education program, sharing his story as a cautionary tale to troubled youth. He also started writing, pouring out his thoughts and experiences in a journal that he hoped might one day help others understand the factors that lead to such devastating choices. Back in Millbrook, Detective Sarah Johnson found herself reevaluating her entire approach to law enforcement. The restorative justice process had shown her a different side of crime and punishment, one that challenged her long-held beliefs about the nature of justice. She arranged a meeting with Mayor Michael Andrews to discuss implementing community policing initiatives and exploring alternative sentencing options for nonviolent offenders. The mayor, impressed by her willingness to evolve and adapt, threw his full support behind her proposals. As the weeks passed and the restorative justice sessions continued, a subtle but significant change began to take hold in Millbrook. The initial shock and division sparked by Jack's crimes and subsequent charity work were giving way to a more nuanced understanding of justice, forgiveness, and community responsibility. Emily Chun's Youth Advisory Committee played a crucial role in this transformation. They organized workshops on conflict resolution, launched a mentoring program for at-risk youth, and created a community garden dedicated to the victims of Jack's crimes, a living memorial that symbolized growth and renewal. One sunny afternoon, as Emily was working in the memorial garden, she was joined by Sharon Talbot. The two women worked side by side in comfortable silence for a while before Sharon spoke. "You know, I never thought I'd say this," she began, her hands deep in the soil. "But this process, it's helping. Not just me, but my whole family. We're starting to remember Katie for how she lived, not just how she died." Emily smiled softly. "I'm so glad to hear that, Mrs. Talbot. That's exactly what we hoped this garden would do. Provide a space for healing and positive remembrance." As they continued to work, Sharon shared stories about Katie, her laugh, her dreams, the little quirks that made her unique. For the first time in years, she found herself smiling as she talked about her daughter. The ripple effects of Millbrook's restorative justice experiment began to spread beyond the town's borders. Criminal justice reformers from around the country came to observe and learn from their process. Academic institutions launched studies to measure the long-term impacts of the program on recidivism rates and community healing. Father Thomas, continuing his journey of atonement and service, was invited to speak at conferences and universities about the ethical implications of his decisions and the power of restorative justice. Though he still grappled with the consequences of his choices, he found purpose in sharing his experiences and fostering dialogue about morality, justice, and redemption. As the one-year anniversary of Jack's trial approached, Mayor Michael Andrews called for a town hall meeting to reflect on the journey they had undertaken and to discuss the path forward. The community center was packed as the mayor took the podium. "A year ago, our town was torn apart by unimaginable tragedy," he began. "We were angry, we were scared, and we were divided. But look at us now. We've faced our pain head on. We've had difficult conversations. We've challenged our assumptions about justice and forgiveness. And while we still have a long way to go, I believe we're on the path to becoming a stronger, more compassionate community." As the mayor's words rang out, the people of Millbrook looked around at each other, recognizing the truth in his statement. They had been through a crucible together, and while the scars remained, there was also a newfound resilience, a deeper understanding of the complexities of human nature and the true meaning of justice. The meeting concluded with a proposal from Emily's Youth Committee, an annual day of community service and remembrance, honoring the victims while also celebrating the town's commitment to healing and positive change. As the crowd filed out of the community center, there was a palpable sense of hope in the air. Millbrook had faced its darkest chapter and emerged not unscathed, but undeniably transformed. They had taken a tragic situation and turned it into an opportunity for growth, understanding, and lasting change. The story of Millbrook, of a priest's difficult choice, a killer's attempt at redemption, and a community's journey towards healing would continue to unfold in the years to come. But on that night, as the town stood united in their commitment to a more just and compassionate future, they knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. As Millbrook entered its second year of the Restorative Justice Program, the town found itself navigating uncharted waters. The initial shock and controversy had given way to a more nuanced, long-term process of healing and transformation. The eyes of the nation remained fixed on this small community, watching to see if their experiment in justice and redemption could stand the test of time. Father Thomas, though still not officially reinstated in his clerical duties, had become a respected voice in the ongoing dialogue about morality and justice. He was invited to give a guest lecture at the local community college on the ethics of forgiveness and redemption. As he stood before the packed auditorium, he took a deep breath, acutely aware of the weight of his words. "The journey we've undertaken in Millbrook is not an easy one," he began. "It challenges our most basic assumptions about right and wrong, punishment and rehabilitation. But it also offers us a chance to explore the true meaning of justice and the transformative power of compassion." Among the students listening intently was Jake, the young man from Emily's youth committee who had approached Father Thomas months earlier with questions about forgiveness. As the lecture concluded, Jake raised his hand. "Father Thomas," he said, his voice slightly shaky, "how do you reconcile the idea of forgiveness with the need for justice? Doesn't forgiving someone like Jack Wilson diminish the severity of his crimes?" The priest nodded thoughtfully. "That's an excellent question, Jake. Forgiveness doesn't negate the need for justice or accountability. Jack is serving his sentence, and nothing can undo the harm he's caused. But forgiveness is not about excusing the action. It's about freeing ourselves from the burden of hatred and allowing for the possibility of transformation, both for the offender and the community." As the discussion continued, it became clear that the students were grappling with the same complex issues that had divided Millbrook. But there was also a sense of engagement and openness that gave Father Thomas hope for the future. Meanwhile, at the prison, Jack Wilson continued his own journey of introspection and atonement. He had become deeply involved in the prison's restorative justice programs, sharing his story with other inmates and working to understand the root causes of his own violent behavior. One day, he received an unexpected visitor. Detective Sarah Johnson had come to see him, her face a mask of professional detachment tinged with curiosity. Wilson," she began, once they were seated in the visitation room, "I've been following the progress of the Restorative Justice Program closely. I have to admit, I was skeptical at first, but I've seen changes in our community that I never thought possible." Jack nodded, his eyes downcast. "I never expected to be a part of something like this. Every day, I'm reminded of the lives I've destroyed, but being able to contribute to some kind of positive change. It doesn't make up for what I've done, but it gives me a reason to keep going." As they continued to talk, Sarah found herself reevaluating her perceptions of criminals and rehabilitation. Jack's genuine remorse and commitment to change challenged her long-held beliefs about the nature of evil and the possibility of redemption. Back in Millbrook, Emily Chun's Youth Advisory Committee had grown into a powerful force for change in the community. They had expanded their initiatives to include a peer counseling program in local schools and a series of workshops on empathy and conflict resolution. One afternoon, as Emily was overseeing a committee meeting, she received an unexpected call from Sharon Talbot. Emily, Sharon's voice was thick with emotion. "I wanted to let you know that I've decided to speak at schools about Katie and our experience with the Restorative Justice Program. If sharing our story can help prevent other families from experiencing this kind of pain, then maybe some good can come from our tragedy." Emily felt a lump form in her throat. "Mrs. Talbot, that's incredibly brave of you. Your voice will be so powerful. Is there anything we can do to support you?" As they discussed the details, Emily marveled at the strength and resilience of the human spirit. Sharon Talbot had every reason to be consumed by bitterness and anger, yet here she was, channeling her pain into a force for positive change. The Millbrook Gazette, under Margot Winter's leadership, continued to provide thoughtful, in-depth coverage of the town's ongoing journey. Her balanced reporting had garnered national attention, and she was invited to speak at a prestigious journalism conference about covering complex, emotionally charged stories. As Margot prepared for her speech, she reflected on the transformation she had witnessed in her town. In Millbrook, she wrote in her notes, "We've seen firsthand that justice is not a simple matter of punishment, but a complex process of accountability, healing, and growth. Our story is far from over, but we're learning that even in the darkest of circumstances, there is potential for light." Mayor Michael Andrews, inspired by the progress he'd seen, began working with other town leaders to implement restorative justice principles more broadly. They launched a community mediation program to handle minor disputes and explored alternative sentencing options for non-violent offenders. One evening, as Michael was leaving his office, he ran into Detective Sarah Johnson. The two had developed a strong working relationship over the past year, united in their efforts to reform Millbrook's approach to justice. "Sarah," Michael greeted her warmly, "I've been meaning to talk to you about expanding our community policing initiatives. Your insights have been invaluable in this process." As they walked together, discussing ideas for the future, both felt a sense of cautious optimism. They knew that changing entrenched systems and beliefs was a slow, often frustrating process, but they had seen firsthand the potential for transformation when a community comes together with open minds and compassionate hearts. As the second anniversary of Jack's trial approached, Millbrook prepared for the day of remembrance and service proposed by Emily's Youth Committee. The event had grown beyond their initial vision, evolving into a town-wide celebration of resilience and community spirit. The day began with a solemn ceremony at the Memorial Garden, where the names of Jack's victims were read aloud and moments of silence were observed. Sharon Talbot, speaking publicly for the first time about her experience with the restorative justice program, moved many to tears with her words of pain, forgiveness, and hope. Following the ceremony, the town broke into groups for various service projects. Some cleaned up local parks, others volunteered at nursing homes, and a large contingent worked on expanding the community garden. Father Thomas, working alongside his former parishioners to build a new playground, felt a deep sense of connection and purpose. Though his path had been difficult and his choices controversial, he saw in the faces around him the fruits of compassion and the power of second chances. As the day drew to a close, the town gathered in the square for a community potluck dinner. The atmosphere was one of subdued celebration, not forgetting the tragedy that had brought them to this point, but acknowledging the strength and unity they had found in its wake. Emily Chun, looking out over the gathered crowd, felt a surge of pride and hope. She saw former adversaries engaged in friendly conversation, victims' family members finding comfort and community support, and young people passionately discussing plans for future initiatives. Mayor Andrews took the stage to address the town. 2 years ago, he began, "We stood at a crossroads. We could have let anger and fear divide us, or we could choose a different path. It hasn't been easy, and we still have a long way to go. But look around you. See the connections we've forged, the understanding we've gained, the healing we've begun. This is the power of restorative justice. This is the strength of a community that chooses compassion over vengeance, hope over despair." As the mayor's words rang out over the square, a palpable sense of unity and purpose settled over the gathered crowd. They had been through a crucible together and emerged stronger, more empathetic, and more committed to justice that heals rather than merely punishes. In the prison, Jack Wilson sat in his cell, a letter from Emily Chun in his hands detailing the day's events. Tears streamed down his face as he read about the community's ongoing journey of healing and transformation. He knew that he would spend the rest of his life behind bars, but the knowledge that some good had come from his terrible actions gave him a measure of peace. As night fell on Millbrook, the town settled into a quiet reflection. They had not forgotten the pain of the past, nor had they excused the inexcusable, but they had chosen to face their darkest chapter with courage, compassion, and a commitment to creating a more just and empathetic community. The story of Millbrook, of a priest's difficult choice, a killer's path to redemption, and the town's journey towards restorative justice, continued to unfold. It was a testament to the complexity of human nature, the power of forgiveness, and the potential for growth and healing, even in the face of unimaginable tragedy. As the stars twinkled overhead, Millbrook stood as a beacon of hope, a living experiment in the transformative power of restorative justice. Their journey was far from over, but they faced the future with open hearts and a shared commitment to building a more compassionate world. One small act of understanding at a time. As Millbrook entered its third year since the trial that had changed everything, the town found itself at a crossroads once again. The initial fervor of the restorative justice program had settled into a steady, ongoing process of community healing and transformation. But now, new challenges and opportunities were emerging, testing the resilience of the changes they had worked so hard to implement. One crisp autumn morning, Father Thomas received an unexpected letter from the diocese. With trembling hands, he opened it, his heart racing as he read the contents. The church, after long deliberation, had decided to reinstate him to his clerical duties. The letter praised his dedication to the principles of forgiveness and redemption, while also acknowledging the controversial nature of his past decisions. As he sat in the quiet of his study, Father Thomas felt a complex mix of emotions wash over him. Relief, gratitude, and a renewed sense of purpose mingled with the lingering doubts and regrets he had carried for so long. He knew that his return to official duties would be met with mixed reactions in the community, but he was committed to continuing his work of healing and reconciliation. Meanwhile, Emily Chun, now a respected community leader, was facing challenges of her own. The youth advisory committee she had founded was preparing to transition as many of its original members, including Emily herself, were heading off to college. As she worked to ensure the continuity of their initiatives, she couldn't help but reflect on how much had changed, both in Millbrook and in herself. One afternoon, as Emily was training the next generation of youth leaders, she received an unexpected visitor. Detective Sarah Johnson, now the town's police chief, stopped by the community center. "Emily," Sarah began, a hint of excitement in her voice, "I've got some news. The state has taken notice of Millbrook's restorative justice program. They want to use our model as a pilot for other communities across the state." Emily's eyes widened in surprise and pride. "That's incredible, Chief Johnson. But are we ready for that kind of attention? We're still figuring things out ourselves." Sarah nodded thoughtfully. "You're right. We don't have all the answers. But our willingness to try, to face these difficult issues head-on, that's what they're interested in. They want to learn from our successes and our mistakes." As the two women discussed the implications of this development, they were joined by Mayor Michael Andrews. The mayor had just returned from a national conference on criminal justice reform, where Millbrook's story had been a central topic of discussion. "It's amazing," Michael said, shaking his head in wonder. 3 years ago, we were a town torn apart by tragedy. Now we're being looked to as a model for healing and reform. But with that comes great responsibility." The three of them spent the next few hours in deep discussion, grappling with the challenges and opportunities that lay ahead. How could they share their experiences without oversimplifying the complex, often painful process they had undergone? How could they help other communities find their own paths to restorative justice while acknowledging that there was no one-size-fits-all solution? As news of the state's interest in Millbrook's program spread, the town found itself once again in the national spotlight. Journalists, researchers, and policymakers descended on the small community, eager to understand the factors that had contributed to their transformation. Margot Winters, editor-in-chief of the Millbrook Gazette, found herself in high demand as other news outlets sought her insights on covering such a complex, emotionally charged story over an extended period. She used her platform to emphasize the importance of nuanced, responsible reporting in shaping public discourse on issues of crime, punishment, and rehabilitation. In the midst of this renewed attention, Jack Wilson's story continued to evolve. His work within the prison system had gained recognition, and he had become a valuable resource in helping other inmates engage with restorative justice principles. Though he would never be free, he had found a way to contribute positively to society, a fact that brought both solace and ongoing remorse. One day, Jack received a visitor he never expected to see again. Sharon Talbot, the mother of one of his victims, had come to see him. As they sat across from each other in the visitation room, the weight of their shared history hung heavy in the air. Wilson, Sharon began, her voice steady but tinged with emotion. I've spent a lot of time thinking about forgiveness, about what it means, and whether it's even possible in a situation like ours. Jack listened silently, hardly daring to breathe. I want you to know, she continued, that I'll never forget what you did. The pain will always be there, but I've realized that holding on to hatred was poisoning my own life. So I'm here to tell you that I forgive you, not for your sake, but for mine, and for Katie's. Tears streamed down Jack's face as he absorbed her words. Mrs. Talbot, thank you. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness. I'll spend the rest of my life trying to honor Katie's memory by helping others avoid the path I took. As Sharon left the prison that day, she felt as if a great weight had been lifted from her shoulders. Her journey was far from over, but she had taken a crucial step towards reclaiming her life from the shadow of tragedy. Back in Millbrook, Father Thomas was preparing for his first Sunday sermon since being reinstated. As he stood at the pulpit, looking out over the congregation, some faces welcoming, others still wary, he felt the full weight of his responsibility. My dear friends, he began, his voice filled with emotion. I stand before you today with a heart full of gratitude and humility. Our journey these past years has been one of immense pain, but also of incredible growth. We've wrestled with questions of justice, forgiveness, and redemption. We've faced our deepest fears and our highest hopes. As he spoke, weaving together themes of compassion, accountability, and the ongoing work of healing, the congregation listened in rapt attention. Even those who would be most critical of his past actions found themselves moved by his words and his evident commitment to the community's well-being. In the following weeks and months, Millbrook continued to navigate the complexities of their newfound role as a model for restorative justice. They hosted workshops for officials from other towns, sharing their experiences while emphasizing that each community must find its own path. Emily Chun, though now away at college, remained deeply involved in Millbrook's ongoing transformation. She organized a conference bringing together youth leaders from across the state to discuss the role of young people in criminal justice reform and community healing. As the conference unfolded, Emily was struck by the passion and insight of her peers. In their discussions and debates, she saw the seeds of a broader movement, one that could potentially reshape society's approach to crime, punishment, and rehabilitation. Meanwhile, Detective Sarah Johnson, in her role as police chief, was working to implement the lessons of restorative justice in day-to-day policing. She introduced new training programs focusing on de-escalation, community engagement, and recognizing the root causes of criminal behavior. One evening, as Sarah was leaving the station after a long day, she ran into Jake, the young man who had once questioned Father Thomas about the nature of forgiveness. Jake had recently joined the police force, inspired by the changes he had seen in his community. "Chief," Jake said, falling into step beside her, "I've been thinking about something you said in training, about how our job isn't just to enforce the law, but to help build a safer, more just community. It's so different from how I used to think about police work." Sarah smiled, recognizing in Jake's words the transformation that had taken place not just in him but in the entire community. "That's right, Jake. We're not just here to react to crime, but to help prevent it, to be part of the solution, not just deal with the aftermath." As they walked, discussing the challenges and rewards of their chosen path, Sarah felt a sense of hope for the future. In Jake and his peers, she saw the next generation of law enforcement, one committed to justice that heals rather than merely punishes. As Millbrook approached the 4th anniversary of the events that had changed everything, the town prepared for another day of remembrance and service. But this year felt different. The pain and tragedy were not forgotten, but they no longer defined the community. Instead, There was a sense of purpose, of a shared commitment to ongoing growth and positive change. On the day of the event, people from all walks of life came together to work on various community projects. Father Thomas and Emily Chun, home from college, worked side by side planting trees in the memorial garden. Detectives Sarah Johnson and Jake helped repaint a women's shelter. Mayor Michael Andrews and Margot Winters served meals at the homeless shelter. As the sun began to set, the town gathered in the square for a candlelight vigil. One by one, people stood to share stories of how the restorative justice program had impacted their lives. There were tales of healing, of newfound understanding, of bridges built across seemingly insurmountable divides. As the last speaker finished, a hush fell over the crowd. In that moment of shared silence, the people of Millbrook felt the full weight of their journey, the pain they had endured, the challenges they had overcome, and the ongoing work that lay ahead. But there was something else too, a sense of pride in what they had accomplished, and a renewed commitment to the principles of compassion, accountability, and healing that had guided them through their darkest hours. As the candles flickered in the gentle evening breeze, Millbrook stood as a testament to the power of restorative justice, the strength of community, and the enduring human capacity for growth and transformation. Their story was far from over, but they faced the future with open hearts and a shared vision of a more just and compassionate world. In the soft glow of the candlelight, the faces of Father Thomas, Emily Chun, Detective Sarah Johnson, Mayor Michael Andrews, Margot Winters, and countless others reflected the light of hope, a hope born from tragedy, nurtured by compassion, and sustained by an unwavering commitment to the difficult but vital work of true justice and communal healing. And so, as night fell on Millbrook, the town that had become a beacon of restorative justice continued its journey. They knew that challenges lay ahead, that their work was far from done, but they also knew that together, they had the strength, the wisdom, and the compassion to face whatever the future might bring. In the end, the story of Millbrook, of a priest's fateful decision, a killer's path to redemption, and a community's journey towards healing had become something greater than any one individual. It had become a living testament to the transformative power of restorative justice, a reminder that even in the darkest of times, there is always the possibility of light, of growth, and of a justice that truly heals. If you enjoyed this story, we'd love for you to support us by leaving a like and subscribing to our Slices of Life channel. We'd also love to hear from you in the comments. Which city are you talking about? It's very rewarding for us to provide our followers with an enjoyable moment. We appreciate the unconditional support you show us in every story. Blessings!